I've been interested in how a Canon compact camera that was released in 2025 would compare to a Sony APS-C camera that was released in 2021. The Canon PowerShot V1 has a 1.4-inch sensor, which is smaller than the Sony ZV-E10 sensor. But what does that mean if you're shooting in 1080 and you happen to be in low light? See if you can tell which one of these two cameras got this shot. It may be hard to tell if you don't know what to look for, because both of these shots look very close, especially when you're shooting in 1080. Or how about this real estate type shot, where I threw both cameras up onto a slider and I switched them over to 4K resolution and 24 frames per second. I'm exposing for the sunlight that's coming through the window, and in theory, one of these two cameras should have a better dynamic range. And you'd be able to see this by looking in the darker areas or the shadows. And skin tones don't look too far off with either of these cameras. Although I do see a little bit more saturation in camera B, and this is with me shooting both cameras in their standard color profile. Now, that was on a tripod, and this is going handheld at arm's length. And you can see a substantial difference in how shaky camera B is compared to camera A. But when we come back indoors and we do an actual product shot like this, there's virtually no difference other than I see a little bit of magenta color background with camera B. And here's the last shot before I reveal to you which one is which. I threw both of these cameras into their log profiles, and one of them does a better job in retaining information for color grading. These are just some of the tests that I like to do, and I've got plenty of more to share with you throughout this entire video. By the way, for this video, I used the kit lens on the Sony ZV-E10, which is the 16 to 50mm f3.5 to 5.6. That way we have a very similar price point. As of the time of recording this video, the Canon PowerShot V1 starts at $899 US, and the Sony ZV-E10 with the kit lens sells for $798 US. So they're pretty close when it comes to pricing, but where they are very different is that the ZV-E10 is an interchangeable lens camera. That means you can purchase additional lenses for the ZV-E10, whereas the PowerShot V1 has a fixed lens. Before I show you the results of that blind test, I want to let you know that this is not a biased review. This video is not being sponsored by Sony or by Canon. In fact, this video is not sponsored by anyone. I bought the Sony ZV-E10 when it was first released a few years ago, and I rented the PowerShot V1 with my own money. If you'd like to support the channel, you could use the affiliate links in the description to make some of your purchases, and that would be greatly appreciated. Also, I made available for free download all of the shots that you're seeing of both of these cameras. That way you can download the footage that I got, and you can play with the footage and the photos in your editors to see if the footage or the images are a good fit for you. I'll leave a link to those files in the description. I just ask that you like this video in return. For this 1080 slow motion shot, I was pretty surprised on how close the saturation looked, especially when it came to the colors of the fire. But when I overlay the shots like this and I crop back and forth, you can see that the PowerShot V1 has more of a cool tone to it, a little bit of a purple hue going on, especially in the background and in the shadows, compared to that warmer tone you get with the Sony ZV-E10. I had both cameras set to auto white balance for this particular shot, because a lot of times you don't have time to dial in your custom white balance, especially if you're an on-the-go content creator. And you can see here that the ZV-E10 did a lot better as far as colors in the camera goes, but you do lose the ability to turn on stabilization when you're shooting in 1080 120 with the ZV-E10. And to be honest, I was expecting to see a little bit more dynamic range out of the PowerShot V1, being that it's 10-bit, but both cameras did about the same here. And I can't definitively say that one shot looks better than the other. I do see a little bit of a magenta hue going on, again with the PowerShot V1 in the shadows. It's kind of like the same thing I saw with the 1080 120 fire shot we saw earlier. But that could just be the auto white balance being thrown off by that awkward lighting environment that we were in. So with that said, the ZV-E10 held up pretty well when it came to white balance. And when we jump back outside into a pretty nicely lit environment, both cameras do give off a different looking skin tone. But I'm leaning more towards the Sony ZV-E10. The PowerShot V1 on its own, without comparing it to the Sony camera, looks fine to me, although I do see a little bit of cooling or bluish effect going on with the skin tones. The Sony ZV-E10 with the kit lens is able to give me a more real-to-life look without any post-production work or adding any color to the footage itself. But where the PowerShot V1 lacks in its straight-out-of-camera skin tones, it greatly improves in its stabilization aspect along with handheld vlogging. I wouldn't say that the PowerShot V1 looks like it was on a tripod for this shot, but it definitely is more stabilized, which makes it easier to focus on the subject itself, and it isn't as distracting. Whereas the ZV-E10 really just struggles with its stabilization, and if I was to turn stabilization on inside the ZV-E10, it would crop in a lot more and it would look like this. This is with active stabilization set to on, and you can see how close it punches into your face. It's almost like the ZV-E10 no longer is a vlogging camera unless you get a wider lens for it. But if you're in a controlled lighting environment and you throw both cameras up onto a slider, you're not going to see that much of a difference in shots like this. You can certainly see a little bit of color science difference, like the way the PowerShot V1 looks, and in this case it has a little bit of a cooler tone to it, whereas the ZV-E10 does just as well with a little bit less of a wide focal length, and I can also see a warmer hue in the background. I found when I was shooting in their log profiles, I could almost tell right off the bat that I was going to have more information to grade with the PowerShot V1, mainly because it's a 10-bit camera, and I graded both of these about the same, and you can see that the PowerShot V1 has more detail and more realistic looking colors when it comes to the foliage in the background. The ZV-E10 was a little bit tougher on the greens. I almost am seeing like a lime green with the saturation, and I could probably wrestle with the colors to get them closer, but clearly the PowerShot V1 wins. I pulled both lenses focal lengths all the way back to their widest they could go, which was 16mm, to see if I could catch any wide angle distortion, and I wasn't seeing too much for this particular shot. Green screens are always a lot of fun, and for this particular shot, I didn't have a preference on which one not only looks better, but also which one is easier to work with. Right when I dropped the key into the green screen of the PowerShot V1, the green in the background disappeared and gave me a great looking key with minimal post-production work. But the Sony ZV-E10 was also very easy, even though it's an 8-bit camera, but that larger sensor really plays a role when it comes to green screens and keying. When I threw both cameras into my normal YouTube talking head configuration like this, I was pretty surprised on how the PowerShot V1 seems to outperform the ZV-E10. And to give a little bit of context, right now I'm using a full-frame Sony a7S III with a 35mm f1.4 Zeiss lens on the end of it. The skin tones look more realistic with the PowerShot V1, but the background is not as blurry as I would hope it to be, but it is passable, and the overall image quality I think looks great. The ZV-E10 seems to oversaturate the image, or my skin tones particularly, in this shot, and if you know why that is, please let me know in the comments. My aperture goes down as low as f2.8 with the PowerShot V1 and as low as f3.5 with the ZV-E10's kit lens. So the background blurriness is going to be pretty similar, but I tend to like the ZV-E10's blurriness a little bit more. But where we got really close on not only the image quality but also the skin tones is in this overhead configuration. I didn't really see that much of a difference at all. I think skin tones and image quality look great on the PowerShot V1, and I could easily use this camera as my overhead camera. But the same thing with the ZV-E10, and because they both have articulating displays, it makes both cameras great for this type of angle. And if you're totally new to this and you don't know what I'm talking about when I say flip screen, well, this is where you can actually rotate the display so you can see what the camera is seeing from different angles. The first thing that I did for this image quality test was put both cameras in a backlighting situation. Backlighting shots are always great indicators on which one of these two cameras can sustain harsh lighting conditions, and in this case, I think they did about the same. And for our stabilization test, you can see that they're not the best, but the PowerShot V1 did way better than the ZV-E10, and that's with stabilization turned on for both, and I'm walking handheld with both of my hands, keeping it as steady as possible. When I did this exposure transition test, I noticed how fast the PowerShot V1 was able to expose for my face, and how painfully slow the ZV-E10 took. And you can see that after it finally did expose for my face, the background is a little bit more overexposed. I had both cameras set to program auto exposure for this test. I would have never been able to do this in manual exposure, because you never know when you might be in a situation where you're vlogging in program auto and you're in changing lighting environments. And the ZV-E10, at least paired with this kit lens, was not as fast as I hope it would be. In fact, I was wondering if it was ever actually going to re-expose for my face. One more touch on the log profiles that I forgot to mention earlier is the PowerShot V1 can shoot in Canon's C-Log3, and the Sony ZV-E10 can shoot in Sony's S-Log3. And as we saw earlier, there's a little bit more information to work with when it comes to the V1. So if you are a log shooter, then I would go with the PowerShot V1. Now the sun flare with the PowerShot V1 has almost a starburst effect like you would get if you were using a Tamron lens on a mirrorless camera. The ZV-E10, on the other hand, has a little bit more of a halation effect to it, but don't forget this is due to the ZV-E10's lens. The PowerShot V1 has a 22.3 megapixel sensor, and the ZV-E10 has a 24.1 megapixel sensor. So they're both very close when it comes to photography. And with all these shots that I got, I didn't notice too much of a difference other than just their color science. I was seeing different types of greens, but for the most part, you probably wouldn't be able to tell which one was which. And for this shot of the meadow, the sky color of the ZV-E10 is a little bit more blue. Before we jump into features and functionality, let's look at the skin tones and how they look in a low light condition. I had both cameras set to the exact same settings, 4K 24, my shutter speed was 1/50, my aperture was set to f4.5, and my ISO was set to 3200. And you can see that the PowerShot V1 has a little bit of an edge. Both cameras' autofocus systems are very fast, and I can't really say I noticed a big difference between which one was faster, but that just goes to show how much Canon has improved because Sony is known for their autofocus systems. And while we're back inside, I jumped into the studio and conducted some tests on both cameras. The first one that I did was sharpness. And when I scale in about 5,000%, I was pretty surprised to see how much detail both cameras still had. I do see a little bit more noise with the ZV-E10, whereas the PowerShot V1 has a cleaner look to it, especially when we're looking at the white background. I also did this macro shot where I lit both subjects the exact same way, and you see that the PowerShot V1 almost exposes some of the silver that you get on that camera, whereas the ZV-E10 almost underexposes it. This could just be an exposure issue. For the color checker here, both cameras look very similar, but if you look closely, you can see that the PowerShot V1 has slightly hotter colors, which means that the camera is more saturated than the ZV-E10 when you're shooting straight out of camera. Both cameras do have a good amount of customization that you can do with the buttons on the outside of the cameras, although the PowerShot V1 has a mode dial, which I really appreciate because it gives me a little bit more of a tactile experience rather than having to press the mode button on the Sony ZV-E10. Also, the custom dial on the top includes 3 different custom modes, whereas with the Sony ZV-E10, if I wanted to toggle between the modes, I would have to do it from within the menu system. Both cameras do have the same exact ports, which is a mic port for external audio, a headphone port to monitor your audio and also playback, a micro HDMI out so you can externally record, and also a USB-C for transferring files, live streaming, and charging the camera. The PowerShot V1 uses the LP-E17 batteries, which is the smallest of Canon's interchangeable lens camera batteries. And the Sony ZV-E10 uses an NP-FW50. I was able to get more time out of the PowerShot V1 than I was with the ZV-E10's battery, but that was not for continuous shooting, that was just shooting off and on. Both cameras do have removable storage, which is really nice because your SD card can fill up really quickly and then you can swap them in and out and even buy some extras and throw them in your camera bag. I think that the Canon's playback interface is a lot easier not only to use but also to navigate. The screen also is touch sensitive, so I can scroll along the playback timeline, whereas the Sony ZV-E10 I can only control the playback from the buttons. I can't use the touch display for the ZV-E10 at all, not to control the settings at least, only for its focus settings. In the end, the Canon PowerShot V1 and the Sony ZV-E10 are surprisingly close in overall image quality, especially when you throw the ZV-E10's kit lens on the end of it. The ZV-E10 still holds an edge on dynamic range and natural color science, while the PowerShot V1 pulls ahead in not only stabilization, but log grading flexibility, and also I'm gonna say ease of use because it comes with a lens, you don't have to worry about it, you can just turn it on and go out and start shooting with it, particularly if you're doing handheld content or product shots. Both cameras offer excellent value depending on your needs. If you're vlogging or filming in motion, then the Canon Stabilization and its interface are major wins. But for a cleaner image straight out of camera, the Sony may be your better bet. It's impressive just how dangerously close a compact camera in 2025 can get to a larger APS-C system that was released 3 or 4 years ago. And that gap is clearly shrinking. Now for me, I prefer Sony because I have mostly Sony cameras and I learned all of my stuff through Sony, so it's a lot easier to use, but I can see how valuable the Canon PowerShot V1 is. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. I'm Joe with the Film Alliance, and I'll see you on the next video. One of the most asked questions that I receive is, which camera should I buy? I know that you want to make the right decision, and it's a big decision. You want to find the camera that best suits your needs and stays within your budget. Many of you know which camera might be for you, but you need some guidance pinpointing it and feeling confident in your decision. That's why I made this course. I want to put my camera experience and knowledge into a compact and easy to follow format. I jam-packed it with camera buying fundamentals that I guarantee you will carry through the rest of your camera journey. I based this entire course on all the things that I wish I had known or someone had told me when I first started out. From understanding different camera types and their features to matching them with your specific video and photography needs, this course covers it all. After finishing, I'm confident that you'll finally have clarity over every angle and aspect that you might consider when buying a camera. I'll guide you through my entire camera buying process, taking you 90% of the way there. That way you'll be well prepared to make your decision. This is essentially all the guidance that I would give my own brother if he asked me, "Hey Joe, which camera should I buy?" Now I'm going to share that insight with you.